I never imagined my life would be reduced to a bet. Not the kind you make on a football game or a horse race, but a cruel wager made by men in expensive suits with champagne glasses in their hands, laughing as though other people's lives were toys. I was the toy. I was the one they chose to play with. And I didn't even know it until much later, when the truth came crashing down like shattered glass across the floor of my heart. My name is Maria. I'm 26 years old, and for most of my life I've known two things: work and survival. My parents died when I was 17, leaving me with two younger brothers I loved more than anything. I tried my best to raise them, working two jobs, stretching every coin, praying every night that I could keep us together. But love isn't always enough. The court decided I was too young, too poor, too unstable. They were sent to live with an aunt in another city. That day a part of me died. I promised myself I would never let hope destroy me again, so I worked. Cleaning houses, scrubbing floors, polishing silver until my hands cracked. And eventually, I found myself at the Montero mansion, working as a maid in the home of a man so rich, he barely noticed the world outside his gated walls. Arthur Montero. The name still tastes bitter in my mouth. To him, I was invisible, just another uniform moving silently through his hallways, setting trays, carrying glasses, bowing my head. But one night during one of his glittering parties, my life was pulled into the spotlight against my will. I still remember the laughter echoing through the ballroom, the sharp voice of one of his so-called friends challenging him. "Arthur, you say money can buy anything, prove it. Marry someone outside our world, someone beneath your standards. Stay with her for 3 months. Transform her. Make the world believe." And then his eyes slid toward me. I was balancing a tray of champagne flutes, head down, trying to disappear. But I felt their gaze land on me like a knife. Their mocking laughter followed, and I understood I was the punchline. I didn't even know then that Arthur accepted the bet. I didn't know that my name, my dignity, my future had been sold across a polished mahogany table for $5 million. The next morning Arthur came to me. I thought he needed his suit pressed or breakfast served, but instead he asked me to marry him. Just like that, cold, businesslike, as though it were a contract for the purchase of land. At first I laughed, thinking it was a cruel joke, but then he placed a check in front of me, more money than I could ever dream of earning in a lifetime. Enough to pay debts, to secure a future for my brothers if they ever returned to me. Enough to silence the part of me that still craved stability, safety, hope. I should have walked away. I should have ripped the paper in half and thrown it in his arrogant face, but instead my hands trembled and I said yes. Not because I wanted him, not because I wanted the humiliation of standing next to a man who saw me as nothing but an experiment. I said yes because poverty cages you, and sometimes even a poisoned key looks like salvation. Within hours I was in a limousine signing papers in a registry office with lawyers watching my name transformed from Maria the maid into Maria Montero, the millionaire's wife. My stomach twisted with every signature. I wasn't a bride, I was a prisoner walking into a golden cell. He gave me a bedroom bigger than my entire childhood home, filled with velvet curtains and polished furniture. But I couldn't sleep that night. The air felt heavy, the walls suffocating. I sat on the edge of the bed, whispering to myself, 3 months. Just 3 months. Then I'll be free. But freedom is never that simple, is it? Arthur dressed me in gowns that felt like costumes, brought stylists and etiquette teachers to drill into me how to walk, how to smile, how to pretend. At dinners, I was paraded like a trophy, mocked by his friends, dissected by strangers' eyes. Yet I refused to bow my head. When one of his friends tried to humiliate me at a restaurant, I looked him in the eye and asked if judging others was really how he enjoyed wasting his time. For a moment, I saw Arthur's mask crack as though my defiance surprised him, and that's when the game became dangerous, not because of the bet, but because Arthur began to look at me differently. He began to see me as more than a servant, more than a pawn. I caught him staring when he thought I wasn't looking, his cold smile faltering, his voice softening. He started asking about me, about my past. And when I refused to answer, he went behind my back, digging up my history, as if my life were just another file to be studied. When he confronted me about my brothers, I felt exposed, naked. "Why haven't you mentioned your family?" he asked, as if my pain was his to claim. I wanted to scream to tell him he had no right, but instead, tears burned my eyes. Because for the first time, someone saw me not as invisible, but as broken. I should have hated him more. I should have packed my bags then and there. But a part of me wanted to believe he was capable of change. That maybe the man who treated me like a contract could somehow learn to treat me like a human being. It was a dangerous hope. One that would cost me more than I could imagine. Because the truth, the devastating truth, was still waiting in the shadows. The first weeks of marriage felt like wearing a mask that slowly strangled me. Every morning a stylist swept into my room with racks of gowns worth more than I had ever earned in years of work. They pulled and pinned and powdered until I hardly recognized the girl staring back in the mirror. Her hands looked too soft, her face too polished, her smile too practiced. I kept whispering to myself, "That's not me. That's not who I am." Arthur watched me from a distance during those mornings, his sharp eyes assessing me like a sculptor studying a block of stone. He didn't ask me what I liked. He didn't ask me who I was. He simply ordered, corrected, and expected. "Stand straighter. Walk with poise. Don't laugh so loudly." I wanted to scream at him that dignity isn't about posture, it's about the soul. But I bit my tongue because I had agreed to this, hadn't I? I had taken his money. I had chosen this cage. But no one chooses humiliation, and that is what awaited me at every event. The first dinner still burns in my memory. A grand restaurant, golden chandeliers, a table full of Arthur's smug friends. I sat at his side, my palms sweating under silk gloves. One of them, Thomas, the man who started it all, leaned forward with a smile that was more of a sneer. "So this is the famous Mrs. Montero." His tone dripped mockery, every syllable aimed at reminding me I didn't belong. I wanted to shrink. I wanted to melt into the velvet chair and vanish. But something inside me snapped. I looked him straight in the eye and asked calmly, "Do you usually spend so much of your life judging others? Or is tonight a special occasion?" The table froze. Arthur's friends smirked. Thomas choked on his wine. And for a brief shining moment, I felt power, not the kind Arthur's money bought, but the kind that comes from refusing to bow. Arthur didn't scold me. He just looked at me with something unreadable, something that almost looked like respect. After that, the air between us began to change, slowly, subtly. At night I found myself knocking on his office door carrying tea when his eyes looked tired from endless documents. He raised an eyebrow the first time, asking if I thought I could order him to rest. "It doesn't hurt to try," I replied. And for the first time his lips softened into something close to a smile. One evening I found myself sitting across from him, the silence between us not hostile for once. He studied me as though I were a puzzle. "You're different," he said suddenly. I laughed, a sound that was half bitter and half weary. "Different how?" He shook his head, almost embarrassed. "I don't know. Just different." That night, as I returned to my room, I realized my heart was betraying me. It shouldn't have mattered if Arthur thought I was different. It shouldn't have mattered if he smiled at me. He was still the man who saw me as a contract, still the man who dragged me into a world of ridicule. But the heart rarely listens to reason. And then came the etiquette lessons. He brought in an older woman with steel gray hair and eyes that could cut glass. She drilled me daily how to hold a fork, how to sip wine, how to stand without fidgeting. Arthur watched from the sidelines like a hawk. I hated every second. Some days I deliberately dropped the cutlery just to watch his jaw tighten. "You know this is necessary," he said once. "Necessary for whom?" "For you. Because I'm perfectly fine the way I am." We stared at each other, locked in a silent war. And yet, beneath the anger, there was something else. Some unspoken recognition. He couldn't control me completely, and he knew it. I couldn't resist him entirely, and I knew it. The tension followed us into the nights. At charity events I felt the stares of society piercing me, dissecting me. And yet sometimes my words broke through their polished masks. Once when asked about philanthropy, I spoke from my heart. Helping others isn't about galas or gowns. It's about what you do when no one is watching. There was a hush. Even Arthur seemed stunned. For the first time I saw pride flicker in his eyes, but just as he began to lower his walls I saw the cracks in him too. Late at night I found him in the library holding an old photograph, his parents smiling with a young boy who was him. His voice was quieter than I had ever heard. They seemed happy, but it was all control, all performance. My father demanded perfection, and my mother, she chose him over everything else. I listened torn between pity and rage. Pity for the child who had grown up in that cold house. Rage for the man who had chosen to repeat the same cruelty with me. I wanted to tell him he didn't have to live like his father, that he could choose a different path. But before I could, the doorbell rang. When we opened the door, Thomas was there. Smug, smiling, carrying a folder that would destroy the fragile thread of trust I was beginning to weave. He placed it on the table with relish. Proof, he said, that your marriage was nothing more than a bet. The words sliced through me like a blade. Bet. My knees nearly gave way. I turned to Arthur, begging him with my eyes to deny it, to laugh, to call Thomas a liar. But Arthur stayed silent. His lips trembled, his eyes closed, and in that silence I understood everything. My entire life had been played like a hand of cards. Every word, every smile, every night I dared to hope, reduced to the cruelty of a wager between men who thought themselves gods. I heard my own laughter then, harsh, bitter. So this was all a game. My life, my heart, my dignity. A game. Arthur reached for me, desperate, but I pulled away. Don't touch me. You're exactly who I thought you were the day I met you, cold, selfish, incapable of love. And then I turned, climbed the stairs, and packed my things. My tears blurred my vision, but my hands didn't shake. I left that mansion with nothing but a suitcase and a broken heart, vowing never to return. But I didn't know then that broken hearts sometimes burn brighter than fire. And mine was about to set his entire world aflame. I left the mansion that night with the kind of silence that feels louder than screams. The city lights blurred outside the car window as if the world itself was mocking me. I had no destination, no plan, only the need to escape the suffocating walls where every smile, every word, every touch had been poisoned by deceit. For weeks I drifted like a ghost. I rented a small room in a rundown boarding house on the outskirts of the city. I traded marble floors for cracked linoleum, crystal chandeliers for a flickering bulb above my bed. And yet strangely, I felt lighter. I found work at a modest cafe. I scrubbed tables, poured coffee, carried trays once again, but this time the labor felt honest. No gowns, no stage smiles, no hidden contracts. Just the clinking of cups, the chatter of strangers, and the simple relief of earning my bread with my own hands. Customers looked at me and saw only a waitress, not a trophy, not a spectacle. For the first time in months I could breathe, and yet, breathing doesn't mean healing. At night when the cafe closed and I walked back to my tiny room, the memories returned. Arthur's voice, his rare moments of vulnerability, the way he looked at me when I defied Thomas. The nights we almost felt like equals. Those fragments haunted me, not because I missed him, but because I hated that a part of me still wanted to believe he could change. Then one afternoon, as I wiped down a table, I heard the doorbell chime and a voice I thought I'd never hear again. Maria. I froze. My hands stiffened around the rag and my heart thudded painfully. When I turned there, he was Arthur Montero, still in his immaculate suit, but his posture different. Not the arrogant stride of the man I married, but something subdued, almost hesitant. He looked smaller. What are you doing here? I asked, sharper than I intended. I needed to talk to you. His voice was softer than I remembered, almost pleading. There's nothing left to say. I turned back to the table, scrubbing as if I could erase him from the wood. But he didn't leave. He stood there waiting, and for reasons I still don't understand, I finally snapped 5 minutes. We sat across from each other at an empty table. I stayed standing, arms crossed like a shield. He sat, hands, restless eyes searching mine. I know I'm the last person you want to see, he began. And I know what I did was unforgivable. Then why are you here? My voice shook, though I hated giving him that power. Because I need you to know. I regret it. Every moment. I donated the money, Maria. Every penny from that bet, it's gone. I didn't want it tied to us. I don't want it to define what we were, what we could be. His words stunned me, but I refused to let the hope creep in. You think money can erase betrayal? That because you gave it away, I should forgive you? No, he admitted quickly, his eyes glinting with something raw. I know it doesn't fix anything. I needed you to see I'm trying to be different. Not for a game, not for anyone else, for you. I laughed, but there was no joy in it. For me. You're months too late, Arthur. I turned to leave, but his voice caught me. Then take your time. I'll wait, as long as it takes. I didn't believe him, not then. But the days that followed began to prove me wrong. Whispers reached me from places I never expected. Clara, the stylist who once pinned gowns onto me like costumes, found me at the market one morning. She hugged me as if I were family and said, Arthur's changed. He's working with community projects, visiting schools, meeting people outside his world. You should see him, Maria. He's not the same man. I brushed her words aside, but they lingered. Could it be true? Could the man who once treated me as a pawn now be building something real, something good thing? Curiosity gnawed at me, until one morning I walked through the gates of the mansion once more. My chest ached as I crossed that threshold, but what I saw stopped me cold. Arthur was in the garden, not alone with a glass of wine, not barking orders at staff, but kneeling in the grass with children. They laughed as he handed out books, his tailored suit smudged with dirt, his expression unguarded. I almost didn't recognize him. When he saw me, he froze. For a moment it was as though the world stilled. Then he stood, wiping his hands, and walked toward me. Maria, he said softly, his voice carrying none of the arrogance I remembered. I wasn't expecting you. I needed to see for myself, I admitted. My eyes darted to the children still playing. Clara told me what you've been doing. He nodded, shoving his hands into his pockets like a man afraid of his own words. You inspired me, Maria. You made me realize how empty my life was, how much I wasted. I don't want to be that man anymore. I searched his face, trying to pierce through the sincerity. You've really changed, haven't you? I'm trying, he said, and I'll spend the rest of my life proving it if you let me. My heart twisted painfully. I wanted to trust him, but trust isn't something you can rebuild overnight. I took a deep breath, my voice trembling. Arthur, I don't know if I can forget what you did. But maybe I can learn to forgive. His eyes lit up in a way I had never seen before. Hope flickered there, fragile but real. In that moment I realized forgiveness isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the sharpest blade we can wield, the one that cuts through the chains of our own pain. But forgiveness doesn't mean surrender. It doesn't erase the past. It only opens the door to see if the future might be worth walking into. Forgiveness is a fragile thing. It doesn't erase the wounds. It doesn't magically close the scars. But it can allow you to breathe again. I wasn't sure if I was ready to forgive Arthur, but I knew I couldn't live the rest of my life chained to bitterness. Still, forgiving wasn't the same as forgetting. And forgetting was something I could never do. The days that followed were filled with hesitant steps, like learning to walk on uncertain ground. Arthur invited me to join him at one of his new projects, a community school he had funded in a neglected neighborhood. I went not out of trust but out of curiosity. And to my surprise, I saw something that felt genuine. He didn't just write checks, he listened. He knelt beside children, asked teachers what they needed, and stayed long after the photographers left. For once, Arthur wasn't performing. He was present. That night, as we walked back to his car, he glanced at me with a quiet smile. I never knew this could feel so real, he admitted. I thought power was about control. But this feels like the first time I'm alive. I didn't respond. My heart wanted to soften, but my mind warned me not to fall so easily. Love had tricked me before. And yet I couldn't deny that the man beside me was no longer the same man who once placed a check on the counter and demanded my life. Weeks passed. I continued working at the cafe, but sometimes Arthur appeared with children trailing him or books in his arms, or simply to sit at one of my tables like any other customer. He didn't demand my time. He didn't try to buy my presence. He just showed up. Slowly the walls I built around my heart began to tremble. One afternoon I asked him the question that had burned inside me since the night of my humiliation. Arthur, why? Why did you make that bet? He didn't flinch. He didn't try to excuse himself. He just lowered his eyes and said, "Because I was my father's son. I believed people were pieces on a board and winning meant everything. I thought love was weakness. But then you..." His voice cracked. "You weren't supposed to matter. But you did." And by the time I realized it, I had already destroyed everything. His honesty cut deeper than his lies ever had. For the first time I saw not the millionaire, not the manipulator, but the broken boy shaped by cruelty. And maybe that was when I finally understood his betrayal was not about me. It was about his emptiness, his blindness. That didn't excuse it, but it explained it. I told him then, change isn't about what you do when people are watching. It's about what you choose when no one is keeping score. If you want to prove yourself, Arthur, don't prove it to me. Prove it to yourself. From that moment on, I stepped back. I didn't return to the mansion. I didn't rush to his side. I let him walk his path while I walked mine. I rebuilt myself in the cafe, surrounded by the ordinary beauty of laughter, spilled coffee, and small kindnesses. I began writing again in my notebook, the same one Arthur once peeked into without permission. But this time my words weren't about survival. They were about healing. Months passed before I saw him again. Not at the cafe, not in the mansion, but at a public event for one of his projects. I watched him from the crowd, speaking not with arrogance, but with humility. He talked about second chances, about the danger of believing money can buy worth. And when his eyes found mine among the audience, his voice faltered just for a second. Later, when the event ended, he approached me quietly. "Maria," he said, almost breathless. "You came." I looked at him, at the man who had once shattered me, and I realized the truth. I wasn't the same woman anymore. I wasn't the maid or the contract bride or even the betrayed wife. I was something stronger, something freer. "I didn't come for you," I said softly. "I came to see if the world you're building is real. And maybe it is." We stood there in silence, the noise of the crowd fading. Finally he whispered, "Do I still have a place in your life?" I smiled faintly, though my eyes burned with unspoken tears. "Arthur, maybe. But if I ever let you back into my heart, it won't be because of who you were. It will be because of who you choose to become." And that is where our story rests, not in the certainty of happily ever after, but in the fragile, trembling hope of change. I don't know if I'll ever love him the way I once dreamed. I don't know if trust can ever be fully restored. But I do know this betrayal broke me, but it also taught me. It taught me that dignity cannot be bought, that love without respect is just another form of cruelty, and that sometimes the sharpest revenge is living free, unchained, and unafraid. So if you are listening to my story, and you've been betrayed, humiliated, or discarded, know this: your worth is not defined by the ones who fail to see it. You are not a game, you are not a bet, you are not replaceable. And sometimes the best justice is to rise above, stronger than they ever believed you could be. Because in the end, Arthur may have thought he won a wager, but I walked away with something he never expected: the power to forgive, the strength to heal, and the courage to decide my own ending. So tell me, if this were your story, would you choose revenge or forgiveness? If my story touched you, please like, share, and subscribe. Leave a comment below. Tell me your thoughts, your pain, your strength. Your voice matters here more than you know.